Hi, folks. Today we're going to give a little look at Victorian and horror, the samples from Bleak House, the North Mail, and the Body Snatcher. Now, horror, as we've discussed, was a staple of popular Victorian literature, especially Christmas time. We talked about Christmas horror. We want to talk a little more generally or a little more about the specific genre of horror. Many times women writers, and the tales still needed to be fit for women and children. That means limited blood and no explicit sex. Lots of shadows and muted lights, and as our sample shows us, well, still plenty of opportunity for really nice, scary stuff. Standard structure for a horror piece, we'll set the scene, often with a long anticipation cycle. You would find this definitely the case in these pieces that we're looking at. Very long one in the North Mail or the Phantom Coach, whichever title we use. Long setup because there was also other stuff going on in Bleak House. And our, well, supernatural scene comes only at the very end of the Body Snatcher, although we have a different kind of horror going for a long way through it. In all three of these, lots of building tension. We're at the sense of what's going to happen. Is something going to happen? And ideally, there's a sharp concluding twist at the end. It works very well with Bleak House. It's sharp with the Body Snatcher. The Amelia Edwards story, if it were run under the original title, the North Mail, would have that. The later title or substitute title, the Phantom Coach, kind of gives away too much. It ruins the story, but that's we're kind of stuck with that. Now, the Body Snatcher, the supernatural scene is foreshadowed. That is, we have a mention of, have you seen it again, back at the very beginning of the story, and you have the elements of foreshadowing that something unusual or improper is going to happen, taking form as Fettis and McFarlane are robbing the grave, digging up the grave. But the story, its horror, is something that runs through the entirety because, well, that dissecting lab is an ugly place. We are seeing murders going on, a sequence of them. Tension in the story, in this story, the Body Snatchers, more due to the horror of the dissecting lab, the real horror, the resurrection men at work, them murdering Jane Galbraith and McFarlane murdering Gray. And then the supernatural scene is almost a toss-on, an intrusion of conscience, and honestly, it does not knock me nearly as hard as the rest, the full atmosphere throughout the story. North Mail, or Phantom Coach, is more standard. And yes, we have our protagonist lost on the moors. That's always good for Gothic or horror. He finds shelter with a mad scientist, and we go on with the mad scientist seeming a rather nice host and chattering away for a good deal of things. And then we ask ourselves, as the horror, the meeting with the Phantom Coach, the wrecked North Mail coach, happens, gee, was all of that first half a distraction from the culminating action? Was it just, oh, he should have stayed put? Or was it something else? Was he being set up? Did our mad scientist actually set up the encounter? And we can ask that looking at section 10 of the text, the way it's divided on the online site. You won't find it divided into sections elsewhere, so that gets difficult. But the servant certainly abandons the narrator in a selected dangerous spot, as we've got, yes, here in the tiny writing that you're not going to read on the screen here, but that's the segment right there where our narrator hears the tale, the danger of the phantom coach, and just has it tossed upon him, nastily tossed upon him. Narrator, of course, then, out there in the snow, stumbles upon the phantom coach, flags it down, gets inside, realizes, oh so slowly, that something is wrong, and it culminates in that paragraph that I've put on here. Words I was about to utter died upon my lips. A strange horror, dreadful horror came upon me. My sight had by this time become used to the gloom of the coach, and I could see with tolerable distinctness. I turned to my opposite neighbor. He, too, was looking at me with the same startling pallor in his face, the same stony glitter. I passed my hand across my brow. Oh, I saw. He was no living man. None of them were living men like myself. Ah. And so he's on the coach with ghosts, and they're going to go over the hill because that's part of the way things happen to them. And so it goes. He survives. He has to be able to tell the tale. And he withholds the tale because he's sure no one will believe him. And then he finally says what happened to him. Standard form. Very standard form for horror. Our Bleak House segment. Now this is going to run a lot of that standard form. It's not intended as a standalone horror piece. It's a horrifying scene in a novel with much varied form. This is Dickens at work, and let me explain the scene so that you know what all this is about. Otherwise, it will look largely like nonsense. Now then, in the story, William Guppy, a minor character, he has fallen in love, unrequited love, it better be. He's kind of a nitwit. But Guppy falls in love with Esther Summerson, the protagonist, and he is conspiring. He's made some discoveries, and so he is conspiring to retrieve some dangerous letters that would reveal the birth mother of the illegitimate Elizabeth Summerson to her extreme embarrassment. And Guppy wants to find these things, wants to turn them over to the mother, not because he wants to commit blackmail, but no, he wants to win the favor of the mother and hopefully the daughter because he's in love, and he's got all the best intentions in the world, but he is in this dark conspiracy. As a rag dealer has the letters, he doesn't know what they are. Guppy's friend has ended up rooming above the rag dealer, and so Tony has, feigned a friendship with this crazy old man and come up with a pretext to get the letters. So he's going to save Miss Summerson and Lady Dedlock from blackmail. So our scheme, yes, we've got it going together, and Dickens is going to set the scene. The evening, a bizarre appointment, and we see a foggy evening, except it's particularly smoggy. There's an ugly smell to the place. Tony is waiting. He's feeling guilty about the whole thing. Finally, Guppy's able to show up. They go to Tony's room, and we get there, and some real nightmares as the room is smoky. There is soot in the room. Waiting for midnight is bothering them. The candle won't burn right. Guppy, he throws open a windowsill and sticks his hand on the sill, throws open a window and sticks his hand on the sill and touches some goop, some slime or something, and it makes him scream. He says he wants to cut his hand off. It's so awful. Something is dreadful. So we've built lots of horror there. Then midnight finally arrives. Tony goes to retrieve the letters from the rag dealer, and he can't find the rag dealer. Goes back to William Guppy, and they get down and to look for the rag dealer, and we get our horror culmination here. We find here is a small burnt patch of flooring. Here is the tinder from a little bundle of burnt paper. Seems to be steeped in something. And here is, oh horror, he is here, and from which we will run away, striking out the light and so forth, or Guppy and Tony Weevil have found the old rag dealer, his remains, his burned remains, as he has caught fire, burned by spontaneous combustion. And so we've got them running to the street, this horror scene fully set and such. For the purposes of the novel, it goes on. This means that Guppy doesn't retrieve the letters, doesn't rescue Lady Deadlock, as the letters are going to show up in the hands of a malicious blackmailer and such as that. The scene itself, that, oh, entertainment that runs that thoroughgoing horror. So, that's our little sample of Victorian horror. The Edwards story, very standard of the short stories of the period, follows the rules, puts them together. You sit down, you read this at a sitting, probably in front of the fireside or by a gas lamp. Yes, get a little later in gas lamp fiction, it goes with the shadows and such as that, all fits. And the other two, well, both gruesome. Dickens sets a very gruesome scene by insinuation and imagination, culminating with spontaneous spontaneous combustion. And Stevenson's scene, Stevenson's short story, it is gruesome by the very nature of the subject, the behavior of the protagonist and the antagonist as they're Knox's assistants in that dissection lab. The whole story is, as Stevenson called it himself, a horrible story. So that is, yes, horror from the Victorian period. Thanks, folks.